Hi, and welcome to That Was the Week That Was, the current affairs show where we review the top events of the last week. And this week, we're taking a look back at week 35 of 2023 with Vince McLeod of the Alternative Centre. Hi, Vince. Welcome back.
Hi, Bob, and hi, Internet. Glad to be back. Talk to you again.
This week is a week where some amazing claims were made by some American journalists. I'd just like to remind you all quickly that all the articles we refer to in this week's episode will be in the description. Tucker Carlson said in an interview that he thinks that the USA is speeding towards the assassination of Trump and a hot war with Russia. Do you believe that either of these things is an actual probability, Vince? Or is he just scaremongering for views?
I believe that the potential assassination of Trump is a very real possibility. If you look back on recent American history, the previous man to go against the establishment to the same extent that Donald Trump has done was John F. Kennedy, and he got assassinated. So I think Trump is really following in the footsteps of men who have been assassinated previously. In other words, he's going against the mainstream power brokers, in particular the globalist ones. And I think he's running some major risks for his life on account of this. So I think he's very brave to be doing what he's doing. Regarding the hot war with Russia, I think that one thing that's become apparent in the Ukraine war that's been going on for the last 18 months is that it's possible to have a hot war involving a nuclear power without that nuclear power actually using any nuclear weapons. So that really puts the mutually assured destruction doctrine in the garbage bin and means that it's very possible that NATO might end up going to war with Russia. We've seen that Poland has sharply escalated their military procurement in the recent couple of weeks. So they're definitely getting ready for fighting against Russia. So I think we're far from seeing the end of this yet. And although I don't believe there will be a hot war, I think it's possible it could escalate that far.
Extraordinary. Well, next we had Newsmax host Greg Kelly, who claimed that there's an audio tape so explosive that it will force President Biden to drop out of the 2024 election race. So it's really hard for me to imagine more damning evidence of corruption than the Poroshenko tape. So it's the same question again, I guess, Vince. Is this credible, do you think?
I do not believe it's credible for the simple reason that Joe Biden has been in power for over 50 years. He has been a senator since his late 20s. He's now in his late 70s. So he's actually been a senator for longer than I've even been alive, and I'm not even young. So I'm thinking that if Joe Biden had really done something on tape that would jeopardize his political career, we would have heard about it at some point in the last 50 years. Let's not forget that Joe Biden once said that he didn't want his kids going to schools that had lots of black kids in them because they would be like an urban jungle. And he managed to survive that. His reputation survived that. So I think he can survive whatever's on this tape. And in any case, it's probably a bluff. I've heard many of these stories before. I remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger was running for governor, there were half a dozen stories about him sexually assaulting women, and they all turned out to be nonsense. So I'm not particularly concerned about this tape, and I think it's going to end up being nothing.
In Russia, the Ukrainians have announced that they have captured the small village of Robotny nearly 3 months after the start of the counteroffensive. The Ukrainian army broke through Russia's first line of defense, which analysts say is the most densely fortified since the Second World War. Does this signal that Ukraine has the upper hand?
It may signal that Ukraine has the upper hand on a tactical and operational level, but on a strategic level, it remains to be seen that they're actually winning. They might be pushing Russia out of a little bit of territory, but if Ukraine are losing too many men, and this counteroffensive definitely seems like it's been going slower than expected, it's been more costly than expected, then they cannot be said to be winning on a strategic level. The Russians may have decided that they can't easily achieve their own objectives in Ukraine. So what they're going to do is just bunker down and sit behind the defensive lines and try and bleed the Ukrainian army to the point that they can take it over later. So they're basically trying to do the World War I Battle of Verdun style strategy that the Germans came up with. Falkenhayn came up with a strategy to bleed the French army, and it looks like that's what the Russians are trying to do with Ukraine. It's actually quite incredible how much this Ukraine war is turning out like World War I, in the sense that it's pretty much just bogged down into trench warfare on account of nobody being able to establish air superiority or any kind of artillery superiority.
Right. Well, 6 Russian regions, including Moscow, came under drone attack early Wednesday. This is the biggest Ukrainian drone assault on Russian territory so far. And this seems like a major development to me. What are the implications of this attack, Vince?
Well, to my mind, the most dangerous implication of this attack is that Russia might think to themselves that if the Ukrainians want to play the long-range missile bombardment game, then the Russians will play that game, but with a nuclear warhead. I think that if Ukraine keeps striking Moscow with drones, especially if they do a hit that kills a considerable number of people, which is bound to happen sooner or later if they keep bombing them, then Moscow and Russia might overreact massively and decide to strike back, but with a really big bomb on the end of a missile. So I think things are really getting crazier and crazier in the Ukraine situation, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that the United States is responsible for these increasing drone attacks, and the United States specifically is trying to provoke a Russian overreaction.
This week, I read a few different articles on the Digital Services Act that went into effect in the European Union on Friday. Some are hailing it as an innovative solution to disinformation, but others are considering it to be draconian and saying that we need to brace ourselves for a level of internet censorship that none of us have ever seen before. Is this going to have a significant impact on us over here in New Zealand, Vince?
Unfortunately, all the internet censorship measures being pushed by the same globalist forces, being pushed by the United Nations, who thinks they're fighting terrorism, being pushed by the World Economic Forum, who thinks they're fighting disinformation, and so on. So, unfortunately for us, New Zealand is not going to remain unaffected by these global moves towards censorship. I think we're going to end up with our own Digital Services Act. We're going to see it rammed through probably by the National Party when they become the sixth national government. One of the first things they'll do is ram through an internet censorship bill, and will make things a lot more difficult for basically everybody who wants to speak freely, like we're trying to do on this show.
Yeah, right. Well, apparently companies such as Meta and TikTok have started to offer European users the option of a non-customized feed rather than one that's based on what the platform thinks you want to see. So the massive tech companies are already responding to the law. Do you think that the law could spur on the growth of the small, decentralized social media platforms?
I think it could do, but I also think that the establishment doesn't want this to happen. The establishment's realized that the internet has really become a monster that's out of their control. They never really expected that the internet was going to lead to people discussing so many topics that the government didn't want discussed. They never expected that it was going to lead to an underground culture of free thought, and they're afraid of it. They're trying to clamp down on it as much as they can. So they don't want there to be decentralized social media platforms. They want everybody going to Facebook, which, let's not forget, is probably a CIA project from the beginning. So I think we're going to have to wait and see about that. But I hope very much that there will be third-party social media, because I enjoy going to Gab, I enjoy going to Minds, I enjoy Telegram, I enjoy all the less censored spaces and the spaces that aren't as full of ads. So I hope that happens, but I'm not sure if it will.
Radio New Zealand reported last week that rising profits have contributed to over half of domestic inflation. It argues that, contrary to the public narrative, rising wages are responsible for less than a third of domestic inflation. What do you have to say about this?
Well, it's true that every time there is inflation, there is a narrative from the established business sector to try and push all the blame on rising wages, because they often take the opportunity to price gouge when there's general inflation, and they want someone else taking the blame. As an alternative centrist, I agree with the alternative left when they say that the system is already too unfair towards the worker, and we don't really need pressure being put on lowering wages. So I think that it's possibly time to consider what the Italians have recently done, and they imposed a windfall tax on the banks operating in Italy because they've made so many tens of billions of profits. So I think we might have to think about something like that.
There's an article in Stuff that notes that vegetable prices have increased by 76%. What are the social and economic implications of these increased food prices on our low-income households? And how can the government address this issue?
Well, the social and economic implications, unfortunately, are more desperation and suffering. People are already having trouble making their budgets stretch. I read recently that 65% of New Zealand households are essentially unable to save anything once their weekly bills are paid. So really, higher food prices are just going to lead to a lot more desperation and things going back to how they were during the Great Depression in the 1930s. As far as the government is concerned, what they really need to do is raise wages, and to do that, really the only way they can do that is to reduce the supply of labour through restricting the importation of cheap labour. Unfortunately, corporates don't want to do that either. The corporates want to bring in as much cheap labour as they can, smash the wages down as low as they can, but that, of course, is not going to help households be able to pay their bills. So I think we're going to have to wait and see for the election which government wins, and then see how that government is going to address the issue.
Finally, we have some interesting developments in drug law in America last week. One lawmaker proposed criminalizing the zombie drug tranq, which has been sweeping the streets this year, while the American Health and Human Services has recommended that marijuana be moved from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 controlled substance. So what's your opinion of these developments?
What I read recently is that the Office of the National Drug Control Policy, their director, whose name is Rahul Gupta, he came out and said that the tranq epidemic, tranq is otherwise known as xylazine, this epidemic is the most dangerous drug threat that the United States has ever faced in its history. Apparently, the cause of death between people aged between 25 years and 44 years of age, the number 2 cause of death is now tranq overdose. In other words, xylazine overdose. So I think we're getting to some really desperate times in America. We're seeing some advanced social decay, especially when it comes to this particular kind of drug use. It's killing a lot of people in America, this tranq use. They mix it with fentanyl, which is an extremely deadly combination. And really, I think that the developments in this area are just going to get worse and worse. We're going to see some really terrible social decay. As far as cannabis is concerned, I'm glad to see it that they want to make it a Schedule 3 substance. But personally, I prefer that they just took it out of the schedule completely and just regulated it like tobacco or alcohol. Would make much more sense to me. And as an alternative centrist, we don't really believe in drug prohibition because that's more of an establishment idea. So I'd like to see cannabis and many other things, such as the psychedelics, removed from Schedule 1 and perhaps removed from the scheduling completely.
Well, on that high note, I'd like to ask you all if you would please like and subscribe to the video so that you never miss a show. And if you'd like to help us spread the word, please also share this video with your friends. Thanks also to you, Vince, for joining me once again and sharing your insights with us all. And all I can say is, what a week that was.
Yeah, cheers, Bob. Cheers, Internet. It was an unfortunate week for many people, but for others, it's just getting more interesting. So thanks very much for being with us, and we'll catch you next week.
The alt centre are clown world's good guys. They don't fit into boxes neatly enough to be someone else's tools.